Welcome to another video by Quiet Mind, Happy Heart. In this soft-spoken video, we're going to listen to a very boring reading from a book on woodworking. So sit back and relax and get sleepy, and hopefully this story will send you fast to sleep and cure your insomnia. First, we'll start off with the care of saws and equipment. Elementary woodwork can be learned more easily from small pieces of wood than from large ones. So the exercises that we provide are going to give dimensions that can be handled easily in working out problems. Since it is by what we study and learn that we are able to do something else, the students in beginning this work should thoroughly familiarize themselves with the tools and their names and uses, so that they may more readily understand their application and work. The equipment for general use is as follows: one 20-inch rip saw, one 20-inch crosscut saw, one 10-inch back saw, one 8-inch square, one 8-inch bevel, one 8-inch wing divider, one marking knife, one 3/8-inch and mortising chisel, one bit brace, a 1/4 inch, a 3/8-inch, a 1/2 inch, and a 3/4 inch auger bit, a nail set, a mallet, a hammer, an oil stone, an oil can, a screwdriver, and a dust brush. Further equipment possibly needed is as follows: one number 5 Bailey iron plane, one number 4 Bailey iron plane, a marking gauge, a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, a 3/4 inch, and an inch bevel edge paring chisel, a 1/4 inch and a 3/4 inch skew turning chisel, a 1/4 inch and a 3 turning inch gouge. Tools such as molding, beading, rabbiting, and plow planes can be found in any average tool room and should be issued to students if they are required. A double bench should be equipped with a rack, cam, and active vices, with the locker for the general tools and drawers on each side of the bench with tools for use by students. Carpenters' benches are usually 33 inches high, while cabinet and pattern makers' benches are from 2 inches to 4 inches higher. The careful craftsperson takes great pride in the condition in which their bench is kept, so beginners should see that immediate surroundings are kept in a neat manner with everything in its proper place. The wooden material which is to be delivered from the lumber yard in boards or planks has to be cut into lengths and widths suitable for the work to be done. The tools used for doing this cutting are the rip saw and the cross-cut saw. A great amount of time can be lost in this work for the reason of trying to do work with one tool when another should be used, and especially this is so in regard to saws. A saw will cut faster than a chisel in some places, and make the work as good, if not better. We devote considerable space here to the saw, for we feel that the saw is one of the most important tools and is often neglected. By correct use of this tool, much time can be saved and a greater amount of ground covered than by trying to use a chisel or a jackknife instead. Saws are either reciprocating or continuous in action, the first being a flat blade and practically a straight edge, making a plain cut, as in mill, jig, and sash saws. The latter either a circular or rotating disc, cutting in a plane at right angles to its axis, or a continuous ribbon or band running on two pulleys, making a plane or curved cut with a straight edge parallel to the axis of rotation. Practically speaking, the teeth of any saw are a series of knives which are kept on a circular or straight line, each tooth cutting out its portion of wood and keeping from cutting more by the teeth on either side of it. Each tooth should cut the same amount and carry out the chips or dust, dropping them to the side or below the material being sawed. Different kinds of wood require different teeth in different numbers, whether they be angle or pitch, and a different style of filing. The perfect saw is one that cuts the fastest and smoothest, with the least expenditure of power. To do this, it is evident that each tooth should be constructed and dressed so as to do an equal proportion of the work, for if any of the teeth are out of shape, they are not only useless to themselves, but disadvantageous to the others. A sawtooth has two functions, paring and scraping. A slitting or rip saw for wood should have its cutting edge at about right angles to the fiber of the wood, severing it in one place, the throat of the tooth wedging out. After jointing and setting, file 1/2 of the teeth from each side, which will give the cutting edge of the tooth the slight bevel it should have for soft work. For medium hard woods, use a finer toothed saw, and file in the same manner. For the very hard, tough, and crossed grain wood, use a saw still finer with the teeth slightly beveling, as ripping crossed grain stuff partakes a little of the nature of cross-cutting. In all cases where ripping is done, the thrust of a saw should be on an angle of about 45 degrees to the material being cut. This makes a shearing cut an advantage that can be quickly demonstrated with an ordinary pocket knife, cutting any piece of soft wood. Saws are designated by the number of points or teeth per inch, and the selection of a saw depends upon the character of wood to be worked. A rip saw should have from 4 to 10 teeth per inch, the cross-cut saw from 6 to 16 teeth per inch. This includes the back saw. The harder the wood, the greater the number of teeth the saw should have. We will now consider the cross-cut sawtooth in regard to rake or pitch, this being one of the most important features. Too much care cannot be taken to have the correct amount of pitch for the duty required. Suppose we hold the knife nearly perpendicular. It would then be evident that it would push harder and not cut as smoothly as if it were inclined forward. In addition, too much hook or pitch and too heavy a set are very common faults, not only detrimental to good work, but ruinous to the saw. In the very first case, by having a large amount of pitch, the saw takes hold so keenly that frequently it hangs up suddenly in the thrust. The result, a kinked or broken blade. In the second, by having too much set, the strain caused by the additional and unnecessary amount of set is out of proportion to the strength of the blade, and it can be broken in the same manner. The most general value of pitch used is 60 degrees, although this may be varied a little, more or less, to advantage, as occasion may demand. In all cases, the size of tooth depends largely upon the duty required. A long tooth has the disadvantage of being weak and liable to spring off, but the advantage of giving a greater clearance to the sawdust. The throat space in front of each tooth must be large enough to contain the dust of that tooth from one stroke. The greater the feed, the deeper the dust chamber required, or the more teeth. Where the teeth are fine, the shape of the throat is of special interest. The teeth of a hand saw should be filed so true that on holding it up to the eye and looking along its edge, it will show a central groove down which a fine needle will slide freely the entire length. The groove must be angular in shape and equal on each side, or the saw is not filed properly. The proper amount of bevel is also very important, because if too much bevel is given, the points will score so deeply that the fibers severed from the main body of wood will not crumble out as severed, but will be removed by continued rasping. This is true particularly in hardwoods, as they require less bevel, as well as pitch, than softwood. The next point to be considered is the bevel or fleam of the point. The filer in all cases files from the heel to the point, which is the only correct way. The file is supposed to be perpendicular to the side of the saw in the vertical plane, at an angle of about 45 degrees in the horizontal plane, measuring from file line towards the heel. As previously mentioned, the filing should be done from the heel of the saw toward the point. Many practical saw filers contend that this is wrong, that the filing should be done from the point of the saw toward the handle. But the only support they offer for this theory is that they do away with the feather edge that the filing from the heel of the saw puts on the cutting face of the tooth. The feather edge is no objection, as the main part of it is removed when the teeth are side dressed after the saw is set and sharpened. Against the correctness of filing from point to handle, we may cite the following objections. Where a different angle of back is required, it should be remembered that angle of face should be nearly the same in all cross-cut hand saws, and that angle of back governs angle of point. It will be found very difficult to obtain it without changing the angle of the face of tooth, as the cutting duty is on the long side of the face. Any change is, of course, of great influence. Again, to file from the point of the saw, it is necessary to file with the teeth bent toward the operator. This will cause the saw to vibrate or chatter, a thing which not only renders good, clean, even filing impossible, but breaks the teeth off the file. The setting of a saw is an important part of the work in keeping a saw in order, and should be done after the saw has been jointed. The set should be uniform throughout, as the good working of a saw depends nearly as much on the thing as the filing. One great mistake is often made in setting a saw, and that is to try to put the set into the blade instead of the tooth. The set should not go at the most lower than half the length of the tooth. By going lower, it is liable to spring the body of the saw, if not break the tooth out. Two methods may be given for setting saws. The first or old method, employed before saw sets were invented and still used by older carpenters, is to take a hardwood block, lay the saw upon it, and with a nail set and hammer set every other tooth on the side. Then turn the blade over and repeat the operation on the teeth missed from the first side. It is needless to make any comment on this method when saw sets can be bought that are absolutely reliable in their operation. The second method is to use the saw set. Saw sets are in many styles and can be bought at any hardware store. Saw clamps or vices used to hold the saw when filing can also be purchased, but a simple homemade vise can be put together by means of two pieces of board, one 3 feet 6 inches long and 6 inches wide, and one 2 feet 4 inches long and 6 inches wide. By fastening a piece 2.5 inches thick, about 10 inches from the top of each to act as a fulcrum, and fastening a piece on each board to act as the jaws, and using a wedge at the bottom to tighten it up. In this way, a very serviceable vise is fabricated. A few general rules may be observed in saw filing. Be sure that the file is held at the same angle throughout the operation. File every other tooth on one side, and when filed, reverse the saw and file the other teeth from the other side. For rip saws, place the file at a right angle with the saw and file the rake of tooth at right angles to the edge. After a saw is properly set and filed, lay it on a flat board and rub over the points of the teeth on the sides with an oil stone. This will regulate the set and ensure smooth cutting, making the filing last longer. Should the saw not run true, take another cut with the oil stone over the side toward which it leads. When beams or pieces of wood stand square with each other and the strains are also square with the pieces and the frame, the most common junction is the mortise and tenon. A mortise is an opening which may be square or oblong, intended to receive the tenon, and which may go into the work only a short distance, or may go all the way through. Where it goes only part way through, it is called a blind mortise, and where it passes all the way through, a through mortise. A tenon is a projection on the end of a piece and fits into the mortise. The tenon usually has two shoulders formed by cutting away the sides and should be about 1/3 of the thickness of the piece. There are a number of different styles of this joint and methods of fastening. For this exercise, the material which is to be worked out should be in one piece and then cut into suitable lengths. Students should commence work on a piece with a full understanding of what is required to be done in order to finish the work as called for, and not try to make any kind of work do in order to proceed to the next task. Here are the requirements for this task. The pieces should be perfectly straight and square. The tenon piece should be exactly in the center of the mortise piece, and the angles should be right angles or square. The work should be laid out systematically with the lines in their proper places. The tenon should be made all together with the saw. The mortise should be cut out with the hand mortising chisel. The tenon should fit into the mortise and not be squeezed. The joint should fit closely, and the work should be finished off smoothly on the sides with all the sharp corners and the ends of the pieces sawed square. The following methods, if carried out, will help students finish the work as required. It will be necessary to repeat hereafter the method of planing, as the student by this time should have learned to plane the pieces properly to dimensions. After the material has been planed, mark the piece to the desired length and saw off the pieces square on the ends. Use the knife to mark the lines. In sawing, care must be taken to saw on the right side of the line, because the saw will cut out its own thickness and reduce the length of the piece that much if the piece is sawed off on the wrong side of the line. Leave the tenon piece about 1/4 inch longer than called for, so that the tenon will protrude through and be finished off even with the mortise piece. Now lay out the work. Take the mortise piece, which is 6 inches long, and mark the distance from one end. Locate the first point on the face edge and then measure from this point the width of the tenon piece. Through the points just found, draw the square lines to face the side. Place the square against the face edge and mark on the opposite edge on the corner a small cut for both lines, and square from the face side across the edge. Lay the piece aside and take the tenon piece and point off the distance from the end of the piece to the shoulder. Then mark across the face and back using the square and the knife in marking. Prepare the shoulder lines for the back saw, taking care that the notch is cut on the right side of the line. Next, take the gauge and set it to the distance from the face side to the first side of the mortise, and gauge the lines for the mortise on both sides. Then gauge the lines for the tenon, using a simple gauge, of course. Then take the mortise chisel and make a mark from this line, which will give the thickness of the tenon and the width of the mortise, and then set the gauge out to the width and gauge the rest of the lines. Take the rip saw and saw down the outside of the lines on the tenon piece the length required. Cut off the sides with the back saw. In sawing, split the line so that the tenon will be as thick as the mortise is wide. This means that half the line is to be left on the work. Fasten the mortise piece in the vise, putting a piece below it to keep it from going down when cutting. Place the mortise chisel about center of the mortise. Hold it vertically and with the mallet drive the chisel down into the work. Release the chisel and make a new cut, keeping the flat side of the chisel toward the end to which the mortise is being cut. Having reached the end, turn the chisel around and cut toward the other end in the same manner. Where the mortise goes through, it will be unnecessary to take the chips from the first side. Turn the piece over and repeat the operation on the other side when the chips can be easily removed. Proceed to test the work. See the mortise is straight on the ends. If the tenon is driven into the mortise, it will squeeze the edges out of true and leave an opening on the ends of the mortise. Care should be taken to avoid this fault. A mortise gauge, such as a joiner uses, has two spurs, one being adjusted by the thumb screw at the end of the shank. This mortise gauge is a useful tool in woodworking. The method of joining timbers is sometimes used in heavy framework, but can be used to advantage in light framework that has to be taken apart, such as curtain frames and so on. In the next exercise, all pieces should be square and true to dimensions. The upright and cross pieces should be keyed when square to each other. The brace should fit snugly and form two angles of 45 degrees back at its junction with the upright and cross piece. All joins should fit closely and the whole work should be smoothed off and made true. And add to the upper end the width of the key, drawing the lines and marking them in some manner so that they will be shown as working lines. From the line which locates the lower edge of the cross piece, using the square on the face edge, mark the position on the opposite corner of the lower line on the outside edge by the method given, and square this line across the outside edge, and then measure the width of the tenon plus the width of the key and square the line across. Having laid out the key mortise, lay out the brace mortise, the lower end of which is located 3½ inches below the lower edge of the cross piece. Take the cross piece and lay out the tenon in the same way, using the dimensions that are given in the drawing. After marking the shoulders of the cross piece, lay out the brace mortise, which is 3½ inches from the shoulder to the farthest end, and mark the other lines as called for in the drawing. Use the single gauge as directed in the exercise to mark the side lines of the mortise and tenon and cut the mortise with the mortising chisel, taking care to cut the ends to the proper angle. Saw the tenon as previously directed, and after the sides have been cut off, mark the splay on the lower side of the tenon and cut it off with a paring chisel. The method of finding the length of the brace is of importance, since it will give the student some idea of the application of the square root to practical work of this kind. The hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle equals the square root of the sum of the squares of its sides. For example, take a triangle that is formed by the upright, the cross piece, and the outside of the brace. We have a triangle that has two sides of equal length and wish to obtain the length of the brace on the longest side. We will designate the angle where the cross piece meets the upright and the lower point of the brace on the upright and the outside point of the brace on the cross piece. We then have one side and the other side which we will square and add together, then extract the square root of this sum which will give us the length of the brace on the longest side, to which we must add the length of the tenons that go into the upright and the cross piece. The angles at each end of the brace will be 45 degrees, as the opposite angles of the triangle are equal, there being 180 degrees in the sum of three angles. One of the right angles is 90 degrees, which we subtract from 180 degrees. The remainder is divided by 2, and this will give the number of degrees contained in the angle at the ends of the brace. The lines on the outside of the tenons on the brace are parallel with the upright and the cross piece respectively. The method often used by practical carpenters to get the length of short braces is to take a steel framing square and a rule and find the length of the square by applying the rule to the square. On the short leg of the square there will be found a brace measure which gives the length of the sides of the triangle and the length of the brace. Tapers are found by applying the bevel to the square according to the bevel or the taper required, such as 1 inch on one side and 4 inches on the other side of the square. This would be called a taper of 1 inch in 4 inches. Having cut the pieces to dimension as called for, put them together and finish them off smoothly. Moldings and beads are also sometimes used in work, especially to ornament it, but the chief use of the bead is to conceal open joints by the shadow it casts. An example of this may be seen in wainscoting or large surfaces that are finished with matched ceiling. If the boards were put together without a beaded edge, an unsightly crack would be the result of the shrinking and swelling of the material. Moldings are so varied in form that it would be useless to try to describe them here. We will use a molding for practice in the use of the molding plane. A rabbet is generally a square corner cut out of a piece so as to lap over or to make a place for glass and so on, as in a window sash, glass panel doors, and door frames. The rabbet plane is so constructed that the iron comes out flush with both sides so that it will cut out a sharp corner or interior angle. The tool can be set up as a rabbet plane or philoster, having a fence to guide it along the side and a shoe to stop its cutting when the desired depth is reached. The bead plane that is used here is known as a single quirked bead and has a fence or guide by which it is held in position while the bead is being stuck on the work. The angle bead is made in the same plane, but the work must be turned in order to cut the quirk on the other side. After planing a piece to the desired dimensions, the following steps should be taken. First, cut the rabbet. Second, cut the center bead and cluster of beads or reeding. The reeding is done by first sticking one of the beads by means of the guide piece and then letting one of the quirks of the bead plane follow in the quirk of the bead already stuck. Third, cut the edges and angle beads. Fourth, stick the molding. Another one of the most important methods employed by a joiner is that which is called dovetailing, which is one of three kinds, namely common, lap, and miter. Common dovetailing shows the form of the pins or projecting parts as well as the excavations to be made to receive them. Lap dovetailing is similar to this, but in that system the ends of the dovetails of the side are shortened and the recesses which are to receive them are not cut through when joined together. Miter dovetailing, sometimes called secret dovetailing, conceals the dovetails and shows only the miter at the edges. Concealed dovetailing is particularly useful where the faces of the boards are intended to form a salient angle, that is, one which is on the outside of any piece of work. But when the faces form a reentrant angle, in other words, a joint that is to be seen from the inside, common dovetailing will be best. First of all, it is stronger because dovetails pass entirely instead of only partly through wood, and secondly, it is cheaper because the dovetails which go through the wood take up much less time in working than where a miter has to be left, and further, if well executed, the dovetails are, by the very nature of their work, concealed internally. Finally, the woodwork should be polished with a shellac. Dissolve the shellac in 90% alcohol and stir for 2 hours, although not continuously. Do not allow it to stand long enough to settle. After the shellac is dissolved, the polish is ready for use. Take a piece of old soft wooden material and form it into the ball about the size of an egg in a way to permit the lower side to remain smooth, and on the later pour about 1/2 to a thimbleful of polish. Then around the whole put a 4-cornered piece of old linen and fold it around the ball as you have done with the woolen cloth, but in such a way that you can hold it by the end of the goods. Then move with an even pressure in circular movement from one side of the wood to the other, forward and backward, until the entire surface receives a slight covering of polish. We hope that this boring reading has been a cure for your insomnia. Boring books at bedtime are certainly a way to fall asleep quickly. Thank you so much for joining us. Now sleep, 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 sleep.